Thank you, Pat and Jim. And I'm just totally come off the page and say, that America, the Beautiful, should be the national anthem. And the reason, I mean, your reprise of the Star Spangled Banner as the prelude was as nice, that and Jimi Hendrix, the best versions I've ever heard. And but the reason it was kind of a hustle that the Maryland delegation rammed through Congress somewhere in the 20s because Francis Scott Key was from, kind of a minor poet from Baltimore. They said, well, let's get our guy to be the national anthem. And, it's not bad. I sing it every ball game. People look at me like I'm strange, but I sing it out loud. So, emblazoned on my memory. Emblazon, to portray or inscribe on, as on a heraldic shield, to embellish or decorate. Also to exclaim, celebrate, or extol. Emblazon. Memory, the mental capacity of retaining and reviving impressions or recalling previous experiences. Tomorrow is Memorial Day. Memorial Day. The whole Memorial Day weekend is all about memory, about keeping alive, keeping current in our memory certain courageous acts. The acts commemorated were initially those of Union soldiers during the Civil War, liberating slaves and toppling the unjust order that held them in bondage. Following Appomattox, many local customs memorializing the war dead arose spontaneously. By 1868, Decoration Day was born. General James A. Garfield led commemorative services at Arlington National Cemetery, beginning an annual custom. The first of these events were painful for many in attendance. Some towns had seen nearly all their young men perish in the war. The sacrifice in blood had been so great that it was already emblazoned on everybody's memory. These commemorative events were, in fact, gestures of mourning. In the South, similar celebrations were held for fallen soldiers of the Confederacy. After World War I, Decoration Day was expanded to honor the fallen in all American wars. Regional antipathy remained, however, and believe it or not, it wasn't until 1971 that Congress officially declared Memorial Day a national holiday to be annually celebrated on the last Monday in May. Now, when I was a boy in Cleveland, Ohio, Cleveland Heights, Ohio, Memorial Day was a very big deal. My Boy Scout troop, all the local troops of every type, and dozens of local service organizations marched in the annual parade. Congresswoman Frances P. Bolton addressed the crowd with well-rehearsed admonitions to patriotism. Cannons were fired, bugles sounded. One year, astronaut John Glenn, recently back from orbit, joined the festivities. While the gung-ho patriotism may have diminished, to this day, veterans organizations adorn the graves of their comrades in cemeteries across the land. One Memorial Day weekend, years ago, I failed to mention it during Sunday services. One of my members there at that church chided me and asked that I go to the nearby National Cemetery the following day to pay my respects. and I have done so almost every Memorial Day since. But while there are many Unitarian Universalists who have been noteworthy pacifists, ours is not one of the historic peace churches. And those, if you didn't know, are the Quakers, the Mennonites, and the Church of the Brethren, usually called the Dunkers. And if you're born into one of those churches, you've got a conscientious objector. Your status is confirmed just by virtue of being one of those. Now, two secretaries of defense under President Bill Clinton, Bill Perry and Bill Cohen, were Unitarian Universalists, dues-paying, attending UUs. And that should make it pretty clear that not all UUs are categorically opposed to war. It's worth noting, however, that in the administration of their duties, Secretaries Perry and Cohen were responsible for thousands fewer casualties and tens of thousands fewer foreign casualties than were several of their more bellicose successors. Now, memory. Memory is one of those aspects of life so central that we don't see it. We take it for granted. We stop registering its effects. The term covers many, many mental aptitudes by means of which we retain information and reconstruct past experiences. The human ability to conjure long ago specific episodes from our earlier lives is both familiar and puzzling, and a touchstone to one's personal identity. We recall things that happened earlier, so memory is unlike perception. Moreover, we remember things that actually happened. This makes memory unlike pure imagination, though in practice, the interplay between our perceptions, memories, and imagination is more fluid than fixed. Another thing about memories, they are often infused with emotion. Last weekend, my oldest sister and I were in Cleveland together, and we visited our mother and grandparents' graves and the neighborhood of our youth. All such practices have their root in memory. Indeed, our whole moral and social life is informed by memory. All our promises and commemorations are suffused with it. Maurice Webster was a member of one of the churches I served, and kind of a cantankerous hoot of a fellow, but very, very engaging, and I loved him. He died a year ago yesterday, a few weeks after his 90th birthday. Maurice taught special education in suburban Chicago for over 40 years. The single most important predictor of a person's success in school, Maurice often told me, is the keenness of their memory. Can you remember the spelling list and how to spell all the words? All the state capitals, the formulae, the proof? But there are different kinds of memory. Cramming for a test is one thing. Remembering particular anniversaries, to always keep a spare key hidden away, to hold your tongue if you've had a couple of drinks. How well do we remember that a loved one is still sensitive about something, still grieving a particular loss, or still longing to return to a conversation that earlier you had agreed to revisit, but that later, for want of a fully engaged memory, you have allowed to slip away. So there are different types of memory and different levels of memory. Bodily memories are deep. Once you learn how to knit, or play a musical instrument, or ride a bicycle, it becomes physically ingrained. These are somatic memories. Regularized movements, such as those learned in military training camp and the like, are buried deep into our muscles and bones. At my high school reunion last weekend, I watched, along with many others, a 16-millimeter movie of our class that one of our teachers had made, which included some of the old school songs in the soundtrack. The 95-year-old retired director of athletics, Mr. Moulton, a model of the good sportsmanship he labored to help us all recognize and aspire to, started quietly humming along. And in a flash, all of us joined in. Once again, the old maroon and black will reign, boys. U.S. will win. We'll never let the fighting spirit wane, boys. Unsung for 50 years, not even thought of, that song had been emblazoned on all of our memories. In our memories, actually, in our bones. Children have memories from their earliest hours on earth. The relational patterns that are established in a child's early interactions become the patterns that child comes to expect. If they are manipulative and hateful, the child will come to expect that from others and project that expectation onto subsequent situations throughout her or his life. Traumatic experiences can be very painful, as we all know. People naturally suppress their memory of traumas, or else they can become overwhelming. A related problem comes when suppression is so effective that one's memories become repressed, that is, below the threshold of consciousness. They're in there, but you can't access them. Our military is beset with just this problem. Post-traumatic stress disorder has reached epidemic proportions among our veterans. As has become increasingly obvious in recent years, this is a dangerous cultural time bomb. There are others among us suffering from PTSD as a result of living in an abusive or unsafe home environment. The past is never dead. It isn't even past, wrote William Faulkner. Memory is always with us in the present, always measuring and weighing, always shaping what and how we see in the present moment, here and now. Memory can be a trap when we feel bound by it. All the men in my family are coal miners. Prosperity is outside our family's grasp. Maybe you've heard people say this kind of thing. It's a trap. But memory can be a beacon when we remember unhealthy habits before they knock us for another loop. There is a 12-step parable that speaks to just this situation, about a fellow who repeatedly walks down the street and falls into a big hole. Eventually, he learns to look up while walking until he sees the hole and falls in. Maybe next time he remembers to look up sooner, or maybe not, but eventually he manages to gingerly walk around the big hole and not fall in. The point of the parable is that eventually, by remembering what's happened to him in the past and also remembering what lies ahead, if he follows his all too familiar and formerly unconscious path, the fellow learned to go a whole other way through an entirely different neighborhood and into a whole new section of town and into a whole new kind of life. Memory is essential for all human reasoning and decision making. It's a guiding dimension to life and consciousness. Memory is with you whether you want it or not, a foundational aspect of our ordinary, everyday mind. When activated, memory always has a bearing on the present, but it can take over. People lamenting progress and going on about the good old days fall into that category. People with PTSD, whatever its genesis, need to reckon with it before they can go on effectively with their lives. A competent therapist can help people unlock and give expression to repressed memories. That way they stop taking the person over. They can be put to rest. 2 years ago, while serving the Unitarian Universalist Church in Fullerton, a guest worship leader, Mary Ruth Valecki, who actually was a member of the Long Beach church, came and did a sermon, and it was so powerful, and it was just about that. It was about getting in touch with repressed memories and unlocking them and being completely liberated and reborn, really. So that happens. It can happen to anybody, but it's hard work. Now, not all memory, as I think most of you know, is accurate. Some memories are embellished. The 1950 Japanese movie Rashomon, directed by Kurosawa, involves several characters, each recounting an alternative memory of the same incident. My sisters and I experience this kind of thing all the time. And Kurosawa never made a movie about us. But each of us recalling completely differently incidents from our youth. He would say, do you remember that dinner when Mom... No, you got that included. That was Aunt for Ann. Anyway, errant memory can have minor or major, tragic or humorous consequences. Churches are communities of memory, communities of hope and aspiration, and also of memory. Only some of us here remember Maud Ann Wright, who was a member here for a few years, not a long time, and who moved to San Diego and then, earlier this year, died. Only the very newest of our members did not know Chili Barlow and Margaret Cook, who were more involved at the time of their deaths, and were longtime devoted members, who both died around the turn of the year. But my point is, in each case, some of us do remember them. And as we are a community of memory, Stephanie honored their memories this morning with 3 special candles. Our collective identity includes Maud and Chili and Margaret, and always will include them, just as it includes all who have been part of our community over the decades. Lighting a special candle following the death of one of our members, or snuffing a candle out, as they do in San Francisco, but some ritualized recognition is a way members of UU congregations memorialize our intuitive awareness that each of us is but one cell in a larger body, and that that is of the congregation through time. That this is the gathered congregation, but this congregation is bigger than that. It goes 60 plus years, and it will go on for more than 60 more. Remembering one's integral connection to something larger, something transcending both time and space, is what we call deep memory. Deep memory involves remembering one's place in the larger cycles of nature within the whole. Remember, become a member, a cell in this bigger thing. That is what Barbara Deming's poetic responsive reading, Prayer for the Earth, is all about, that we read earlier together. Now, Barbara Deming herself was a LGBT activist of the first order, but she was nothing, that was long into the future. She was living totally beneath the radar until Central American foreign policy initiatives of the Reagan administration radicalized her into an out-of-the-closet, politically engaged life, calling upon others to activate their own deep memory of connection and to begin emblazing those connections onto their personal memories as well. Barbara Deming. As mentioned earlier, there are different types, different levels of memory. We study for a quiz and forget 2/3 of it within a week. But deep memory is of a more fundamental order, and never to be fully out of one's mind. There is no fear lest one should forget the truth, declares Socrates, if once he grasps it with his soul. Let us resolve then today to grasp 2 things with our souls. 1, that we are all part of one another, and 2, that we honor those who have died by living as fully and as creatively as we can while we are alive, and by exercising our freedom to do so responsibly. And finally, may we have the ability to love and meet the challenge of keeping love alive. And may that all be emblazoned on our memories evermore. Amen.